You are now listening to Talk Yo Jits Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Talk Yo Jits Podcast. This podcast is, as the name implies, is all about jiu-jitsu. I'm your host, Lamar Smith. This is the very first episode of Talk Yo Jits Podcast. And in this episode will be the introduction, where I give you some background on who I am and what to expect from this podcast. I am a 35-year-old brown belt from Detroit, Michigan. I've been married for 7 years and have 2 lovely daughters. I began my jiu-jitsu journey 5 years ago at H2O Martial Arts in Oak Park, Michigan, under black belt Zachary Holston III. We train under Master Joe Moera, who's located in California. In this podcast, I want people to be able to hear my and other practitioners' story. We will hear from jiu-jitsu practitioners of different ranks, and to hear the benefits and knowledge that we've gained, and the many sacrifices we went through as well. This podcast is for those who are considered training in jiu-jitsu, but might need a little extra push. For those who are already training, the people who just stumbled across this podcast because they thought the name was cool. This is for you. My hopes that you'll discover others like you and be able to take away something valuable from listening to TYJP. Since I was young, I've always had a love for martial arts, but never got a chance to take up any. Either it wasn't a place close enough or just too expensive. When I was old enough to afford it myself, I went and looked for different martial arts schools. Even got a chance to visit some. Some I didn't like the vibe or the place, or they just didn't take me serious because I just wanted to train and learn and not actually fight. As mentioned earlier, I started training about 5 years ago. At this time, I was working at FYE located inside Oakland Mall. There was a GNC about a few doors down I would occasionally visit to ask about supplements and vitamins, because around that time I was trying to get serious about weight loss. On one particular day, the guy behind the counter, who later became one of my best friends, was nursing his injured arm. I asked him about it and he said he heard it during training. I asked, "What are you training in?" Which he replied, "Jiu-jitsu." We chatted about it on and off for a few days and eventually he invited me to train. So a few weeks after, I ended up leaving FYE and started a new job. So I had the availability, so I decided to check it out. My first lesson wasn't in a class, but an open mat. It was held at our affiliate school, Fresh Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, located in St. Clair Shores. When I walked in there was a slew of people on the mats, different sizes and ages. After a brief chat, we paired up and rolled. Granted, I didn't know what the hell I was even doing. First guy I rolled with was a smaller guy, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm pretty strong, so I figured I should be able to handle him. So wrong. I started in his guard, and that's as far as I could get. He was able to control me fully the entire time. I was so confused as to how was he able to do this. After that roll, I was gassed, so I sat out for a minute. Next guy I rolled with was an older guy, so I just knew I wouldn't have any issues. Wrong again. I got fucking manhandled. When I left the whole drive home, I could not stop questioning how were they able to control me like that. I started to even wonder if BJJ was even for me. But something inside was telling me not to give up just yet. When I got up the next day, I immediately began to research more about it. I knew a little bit about jiu-jitsu because I was a fan of MMA, but the information I came across in my research made me want to get more into it. Fast forward to the day I was actually able to take a class. I met the instructor and the other students. It was about 12 of them at the time. The majority were blue and white belts, so I didn't feel intimidated. Only Adam, the guy from GNC, and the instructor Zach were brown belts. The vast amount of knowledge in this gym made me want to learn even more. As time goes on, I purchased my first gi, and I felt pretty excited as I'm actually about to embark on learning a true martial art. I was ready to give it my all. I'd never missed a class and I soaked up every lesson I could. And after a few months of training, I started receiving my stripes. I felt like the king of the world. It made me feel so accomplished. That might not be a big deal to some, but to me, it was everything. But what really set in stone was when I was a few months in, I was probably about 2 stripes, I believe, I got to see my instructor get his black belt. Not only that, I got to meet his instructor, Master Joe Moera. Before the black belt ceremony, he even taught a seminar. Just to be able to get a chance to learn from someone of his caliber was nothing I could ever imagine. I knew from that day forward, I was going to love jiu-jitsu. So, just to give a brief history lesson of our lineage, my instructor, Zachary, is under Master Joe Moera, who's under Grandmaster Francisco Mansour, who was taught by Helios Arroyos Gracie, who was under Carlos Gracie, who was under Metsu Maeda, who was taught by Kano Jigaro. I like to describe jiu-jitsu as the chess of the martial arts world. You're constantly thinking about your next 5 moves. When you're rolling, you can't think of anything else. You have to focus on what's happening or you will be submitted. Since I've started training, jiu-jitsu have changed my mental health for the better. As someone who battles depression, anxiety, and also have ADHD, it definitely keeps me grounded. I can have a crummy day, week, on the verge of a breakdown or whatever. But when I drive to the gym, put that gi on, tie that belt, as soon as my feet hit the mats, nothing even matters anymore. My blue belt journey was pretty chill. I was even surprised I was able to keep up with the martial art that long. It was to the point that I didn't want a job unless I have Tuesdays and Thursdays off to make it to training. I was fully committed to jiu-jitsu, training 4 days a week. When my instructor asked if I wanted to teach our kids class without hesitation, I said sure. I was ecstatic to have the opportunity to teach a class. As time went on, I gained the opportunity to teach adult class alongside upper belts. I began to fall in love with teaching. I look for any and every chance to teach, whether that's before or after class. If someone wants to learn, I'm willing to teach. I'll even find techniques online that may not work for me per se, but if it'll help them, I'm all for it. My purple belt journey. Oof. About a month or 2 after shutdown had been lifted, my instructor and I were talking about me testing for my purple belt. A part of me wanted to decline because I really wasn't training as much due to the shutdown, but my instructor knows how hard I work and he knows this inside and out, so I agreed. A month or so after, test time comes and I'm going over techniques, rules and principles and snakes, and some of you guys call them shrimps. Moved on to the self-defense portion, and I thought I was going to die. Super gassed. Couldn't breathe. Out of shape due to COVID. Nothing was going the way that I wanted it. There were so many points in this test that I just wanted to give up and try to take it another time. But I knew that if I've done that, that would have been the end of my jiu-jitsu journey. There wouldn't have been another time. Luckily, I had an amazing support system. My wife and fellow training partners refused to let me quit. I summed up all that I could, got my ass back out there on those mats, and finished that test. The last portion of the test contains 2 rounds of sports jiu-jitsu. Duration of the time depends on what belt you're testing for. Since I was testing for purple, I had to endure 2 3-minute rounds. The longest 6 minutes of my life. But that's what the test is designed to do. Push you to your limits. By the time you get to the sports portion of the test, all you have left to depend on is your technique. I literally survived that first 3-minute round. After that, my lungs were on fire, with my muscles absolutely spent. I could not feel a thing. I just laid on a mat, just felt so defeated. But I heard my instructor say, "Let's go, get up, we got another 3 minutes." Started the second round, and it feels like I was moving through quicksand. I get the fight to the ground, ended up in top position, and I just held on for the ride while I was trying to control my breathing and stay dominant. After what seemed like a century, I hear, "All right, guys, let's count them down." The whole class is counting down from 10 to 1. Then the buzzer goes off. All I could manage to do was just roll off my opponent, hit the mat, and just break down. I just felt so much pressure just leave my body as soon as everyone came rushing over to congratulate me. I've never felt like this before. I've never even worked hard for anything like this in my life. But unfortunately, things did not get better once that belt was tied around my waist. During my journey as a purple belt, those 2 years was the worst. My marriage was in a real bad spot. My mother got sick. And to top it all off, in 2021, I lost my father. Just depression was just getting to me bad. I wasn't really mentally training anymore. My weight gain was crazy as well. Everything was just bad. At this point, I had no idea what I wanted to get out of jiu-jitsu or what I wanted to give back to it. I've always loved the idea of owning my own school and teaching one day, which has recently became more and more exciting idea for me to do. But if I wanted to do that, I had to get myself back into the mental space of learning jiu-jitsu. Yeah, things wasn't right at home, so I just took that and just spilled it all on the mats. I've never rode like this before. I started to really work on my own game and got back to learning jiu-jitsu for myself. A little time after I got my 4th stripe on my purple belt, I got word that I will be testing for my brown belt soon. At that point, my brain switched into overdrive. I was so determined to make sure my brown belt test was nothing like my purple. And man, did I put the work in. I was trying to be on the mats as much as I could, rolling after every class. I was working on myself mentally as well by going to see a therapist. I needed to ensure my mental game was as strong as my physical one, and I can say it definitely paid off. Started my brown belt test by showing techniques, got through the self-defense portion with ease. Then it was time for the sports portion of the test. With this belt, it meant that duration was 2 8-minute rolls. I felt amazing afterwards. I was a little tired, sure, but nowhere close to how I felt when I tested for purple. I can't put into words how happy I felt to get that belt behind me. Granted, I did have some great moments at purple, but just life punches were getting to me big time. And as a newly minted brown belt, it still haven't hit me. I'm still processing it, and it still feels odd tying a brown belt around my waist. I know it'll set in sooner or later, and when it does, I'll be ready for whatever comes at me going forward. So to quickly recap, my goal with this podcast is to bring jiu-jitsu to more people. With each episode, or every other, I'll have a guest on TYJP to tell their own story. Perhaps hearing others will encourage you to come and share yours.